current working definition of elder abuse is really more better defined elder mistreatment. Elder mistreatment is a little more encompassing of really what the subject entails or what the problem is. And I think that defining elder abuse, elder mistreatment, you have to look at an ongoing situation where a person 60 or 65 and older, depending on how you define an elder, is being intentionally and purposefully mistreated, either physical abuse, verbal abuse, financial exploitation, active neglect, or sexual abuse. It's one of those 5 categories. So really defining elder abuse is an ongoing pattern of mistreating an older person and taking advantage of them to the perpetrator's benefit. Neglect is an area where there's, I think, a lot of maybe ideas or wrong ideas. Elder neglect, as we see it, there's really 3 areas of elder neglect. The first is self-neglect, where a person, I often use the case of the quote-unquote cat women, the people that live in a house that's cluttered with newspapers halfway to the ceiling. There's only a little pathway down the middle of the house. The house has very bad odors to it. That's a self-neglecting person. That really has much more to do with Adult Protective Services, and that's really where referrals should be made, because Adult Protective Services, which is the county entity that deals with abused, neglected, self-neglecting adults age 18 to the end of life, that's over 50% of their caseload. Adult Protective Services is more geared to ascertaining the risk of a person, an adult, a vulnerable adult who is self-neglecting. The second category of neglect is really, we define it as one of the categories of elder mistreatment, elder abuse, and that's active neglect. Again, you have a individual who is being purposefully and intentionally neglected. That would be over-medication, under-medication, deprivation of food, not being allowed to see their doctor, isolated in the house. Maybe they have a dementia and they're wandering, and so the family is purposefully isolating them and not taking them to the doctor, not giving them the things that they need for a quality of life. That the perpetrator, that is the abuser or the neglector, is gaining in some way from that. Maybe they don't want to spend the money in order to get the proper medications, home health agencies involved, adult daycare, to meet the needs of that older person. And so they are selfishly controlling the situation, very similar to power and control that we see in domestic violence situations. And there has to be, again, a gain. So we have intention, we have power and control, and we have gain for the neglector. That's active neglect. The last category is passive neglect. Passive neglect is really just based in ignorance. That's when you have, for example, say a 90-year-old husband who's caring for his 89-year-old wife. They've been married for 65 years. The kids have moved away, their doctor has retired, they're pretty isolated, and he is trying his best to care for her, and she has an impairment, she has Parkinson's, she has some other disease, is wheelchair bound, and he's trying his best, but he is not able to meet her needs, and she is becoming malnourished, she's not getting the medication she needs. It's a matter of dictionary definition, ignorance. He's uninformed, he's uneducated about what's available, so you may show up on the scene and think that this is a horribly abusive situation, when in fact the caregiver in this scenario really has never heard of adult daycare. They may not have a doctor, they may not have seen a doctor in many, many years because their doctor, again, is retired or moved. If he or she, the caregiver, is then informed of their options and their choices, and they follow through for the care of the care receiver, then it's really considered passive neglect. It's a matter that they just didn't know. what to do. That one is pretty easily remedied by community resources.
We are all part of a team that evaluates and assesses elder abuse and neglect, and we all have the ability to bring what we see, including you in the field, to the attention of the team that will assess the patient. So I view elder abuse as what we call geriatric syndrome, and that means that each of us as healthcare professionals can contribute to the assessment, whether we're a physician, whether we're the nurse, the social worker, the EMS professional, perhaps the clergy that's involved in the case. But in addition to that medical team, we do need to understand the psychosocial aspects, and we have to understand the community aspects. So what we see, for instance, in the field has significant impact in terms of what I, as the physician leader of this interdisciplinary team, can provide. EMS is really the eyes to this issue because you are the first person on the site, and you can be the eyes and bring back information to the healthcare team that will assess the patient. What I'd like to do for this is to break it down into the types of abuse. So when we speak to what are the signs of physical abuse, they may be apparent to our visual sight and part of our assessment of the patient. It may include bruises, welts, it may be a fracture of an individual. Whatever we see, we need to look at objectively, and we understand that certain aspects can indicate abuse more than others. And we're learning more about that all the time. But if we were to see, for instance, a bruise across the left side of the cheek, one could imagine a slap here. And so if you saw a bruise that had linear streaks, it would be important, for instance, to document that. The job is not to understand fully at that time, is it abuse or not? It's really more to be able to document what you've seen. Psychologically speaking, for psychological abuse, people may seem resigned to an environment, again, that doesn't seem to be appropriate for that elder to live in. They may be depressed. They may exhibit signs of hopelessness and that there's no opportunity for them to change. When you begin to think of neglect and what are the signs of neglect, particularly as an EMS provider upon the scene, what you may see is an unkept environment. There may be signs that the housekeeping has not been maintained. You may see some areas that people tend to hoard materials, but importantly, what you'd be looking for is just signs of that would really cause a public health issue. For instance, excrement from animals, waste, perhaps the refrigerator where you might be looking for the emulsiform may not have any food in it. And so that you can begin to look at those aspects of neglect. And when you come upon the scene, all of these are, again, the kinds of information that you want to document and bring back to the team when the patient is taken to the emergency room.
Well, there's a number of good things that EMS providers can look for when they're trying to identify